I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
And this is...
Oeuvre...
Don't tap the keyboard when we do... Oeuvre Busters! Wow. George, this is like the 14th episode.
I think our intros are getting looser, if not, definitely not tighter.
Yeah, we should tighten them up. Let's tighten them up. Let's do another one. I'm Liam Billingham.
Wait, who am I? Oh, that's right.
Oh my God. Yeah, you just said they got... Okay, I'm Liam Billingham.
I was kind of joking.
Okay,
I thought we were rolling.
No, we're into it. Let's just keep going. Okay. Woo.
So
it's
hot there. It's hot
I
here.
feel this is hot. It's hot there. Let's not talk about the weather. Let's not do that thing.
This would actually be a great
just
day to
move
record
into
episodes about an episode on Stray Dog.
Stray Dog. Well, we're not. We're not talking about Stray Dog today. What movie are we talking about?
So, Liam, we're talking about the Quiet Duel from 1949.
Or Shizukanaru Keto is the Japanese title.
I don't know if you nailed that or not, but I will just nod my head and be like, yes.
Nailed it. No, I've been complimented a lot on my pronunciation of... All right, let's just move on. So, Quiet Duel is the second film directed by Akira Kurosawa and starring Toshiro Mifune. What happens in this movie, George?
So The Quiet Duel, a very simple plot summary. Quiet Duel tells the story of Dr. Kyoji, an idealistic and caring doctor who contracts syphilis during the war while operating on a patient. Fast forward a number of years, and Dr. Kyoji is working at a hospital with his father, Dr. Konosuke, who's Kyoji is also engaged to Misao, who's obviously like a younger woman. Basically, Kyoji battles with his illness and he's kind of taking care of himself. He really can't cure himself. It seems like there's the implication being that it's a 5 to 10 year process of going through some sort of kind of treatment to cure himself of syphilis. He feels like he needs to break up with his fiance because he can't fully be with her, that is, sexually be with her, as well as kind of emotionally and spiritually. And we'll talk about that as well because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the film. There's also a subplot with the man who gave him syphilis, who kind of...
Makoto.
Yes, who returns, and it turns out that he's about to have a child with his wife, but obviously kind of the fact that he has this illness, it puts like the child in some sort of jeopardy. There's also another subplot with Nurse Rui Minigishi, who falls in love with Kyoji, and once Kyoji kind of breaks up with his fiance, she makes this really sad but kind of beautiful overture to him towards the end of the film, and he quickly rejects her. And basically the film ends with, well, obviously the engagement kind of being broken off. There's a confrontation with the syphilitic patient. Child dies during childbirth, if I understood it correctly. And basically kind of the film ends on a somewhat optimistic note with Misao getting married to another man and with kind of Kyoji in some sort of way seemingly accepting his burden and kind of returning to his doctoring sort of ways.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a movie about like work as a way to save yourself. It was directed
Work will
by
set
Akira
you free,
Kurosawa.
Liam? Is that what you're saying?
Yikes, not what I said. It was directed by Akira Kurosawa, his 8th film. It was based on a play called The Abortion Doctor by Kazu Kakuta.
Very subtle title.
Yeah, very subtle. And it was written by Senkichi Taniguchi and Akira Kurosawa, produced by Sojiro Motoki and Hisao Ichikawa. The cast includes Toshiro Mifune as Dr. Kyoji Fujisaki, Miki Sanjo as Misao Matsumoto, who is his fiance who he decides not to marry, the great Takashi Shimura as Dr. Konosuke Fujisaki, the father to Toshiro Mifune's character, Kenjira Umera as Susumu Nakata, Noriko Sengoku as Nurse Ryushu Minigishi, and Chiyoko Nakakita as Takiko Nakata. This film was Kurosawa's first film not for Toho. It was made for Daiei, which was a different film studio. I believe I'm saying that right. And a group of directors and producers called the Film Art Association, which was made up of Kurosawa, Senkichi Taniguchi, Kajiro Yamamoto, Mariko Narusi, and Sojiro Motoki. And it kind of sounds like it was like the director's company that Coppola, Friedkin, and Bogdanovich started in the 70s to make movies that, and both, I believe, ultimately failed because they were hard to sustain.
They just wanted to make art, man.
Was made, Kurosawa wanted to make this movie to give Mifune a non-gangster part.
I read that, yeah.
Which is interesting. It was kind of like an attempt to give him something else to do. What'd you think of the movie, George?
I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. There were parts of it that felt very too melodramatic, a little bit like overwrought. The fact that once I found out it was based on a play, a little bit of that kind of made sense. There's a kind of claustrophobia to it, or claustrophobia may be too strong of a word, but a certain kind of staging I feel that kind of like doesn't maybe transcend the limits of the very few kind of sets that we see. But having said that, I mean, I think again, like Mifune's great. There is that great kind of speech that he gives towards the end about like the physical pain he's in, both emotionally and
his breakdown
spiritually. Yeah.
That like long take.
That long take is amazing. But what's also amazing about that scene, and maybe again we'll maybe turn to it, but with the way in which the nurse just quickly kind of tells him that she's in love with him, and then he just kind of like doesn't even like really address it, is an amazing scene. It's so fucking well done. But watching it again, it's funny watching this and then watching God damn it, what did we talk about?
Drunken Angel?
Yeah, Drunken Angel, sorry. Should lay off the whiskey in the middle of the day. But watching them like back to back and thinking about like all...
Why? What's the point?
At this point, right? What is the point?
Yeah, who cares? Gulp.
But watching this film, I was like, oh my God, like I never really thought of Kurosawa as a very spiritual director. And maybe that's like
interesting.
Me being kind of, dumb.
Maybe it's you being dumb.
I'm stupid. I don't know anything about films. But now watching these two films, I'm like, oh, he's very much a spiritual director.
Yeah, I would agree. A lot, and we can definitely get into it. So I loved this movie until the scene that you really liked, which is that climactic scene. I take issue a lot with the way that people talk about, not you, well, maybe you, but I take issue with the way that people talk about like films based on staged plays. Like,
fuck around and find out.
What?
You heard me.
What did you fucking say? I get annoyed when people, I really like movies that are almost like plays, in the sense that I like movies that take place in one or two locations. I like the feeling of being in one environment, and I really think the whole idea of a movie to me is like watching people think and do things, and those are my favorite kind of movies. Really simple kind of things going on. I was thinking this is gonna sound really strange, but I was thinking about the climax of this movie in relationship to the climax of the movie Avengers Endgame.
Of course, no, I was thinking about the same thing.
Because I was thinking a little bit, they're so similar, but I was thinking about the way that like this movie feels optimal to me in the sense that it's about watching actors, or it's about a director letting actors have a really strong experience that is then watched by an audience, and like you feel things while you watch it. And like that might sound profoundly simple, except when you, not to sound reactionary, but when you watch movies now where it's like all about referencing and calling back to things and giving people like an experience where they can like think about stuff they did in the past. Like, oh, I remember this like moment from Avengers Endgame or whatever, where like they reference Captain America Winter Soldier or whatever, like the kind of like sequelization, or we've talked about this before. This just feels like such a particular vision, and it feels, at least to me, quite contemporary, and I'm appreciative of how simple, and I think the staginess really, really works. I don't mind watching like a filmed play. What the that's plays rule. Like what are we? Like one of my favorite movies is Dogville. That's like a staged play. It's great.
Yeah, but I mean that film explicitly. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I was trying to find like other things to compare it to. But like Exterminating Angel, for example, where obviously like everything is supposed to be, or like Now I'm thinking about like other like Buñuel or Buñuel inspired films that again do this. Something like Lanthimos' Dogtooth, where the repetition of the scenes or the sights, or just the fact that there's a again this limited world is part of and is played on in an intelligent and meaningful way. And the same thing with fucking Dogville, where clearly the staging of it is essential and an integral part to the film. All I'm just saying is like with something like this, it almost felt like, because part of me is also like, well, I don't want to just see a play filmed and then put on the screen. Like, why would you, right? That's the whole point of fucking being in the theater. Like, one of the great things about being in the theater.
But not every movie has to be like a massive epic kind of, like, it doesn't, you know, like a movie isn't good because it's like, it changes locations every few minutes, you know, like, which I know is admittedly simplifying what you're saying. Yeah. But I'm, you know.
But it's just like you to be a sophist and to use your wicked sophistry against me and my brilliant arguments.
I'm super soft. I'm super soft in the belly area.
I've never felt more like Socrates than I do right now.
You mean you smell bad?
I smell bad and the state wants to kill me.
Oh no. I see your point. I guess that I think that like movies have movies can do a lot of different things, but two things they do really, really well are give you a sense of scope, but also I think give you like an incredible interiority of the way a character feels and what they're thinking. Yeah. It's short of like the written word, it's I think the most powerful way to communicate like thought. Mm-hmm. And so I was really happy to see a movie. You know, it's interesting because if we compare this, I think that this movie has a lot thematically in relationship with Drunken Angel. Mm-hmm. But one thing that Drunken Angel does is it kind of creates a really specific setting, with the water and all those things.
Yes.
This movie does that a little bit with the rain at the beginning when he's in the Pacific, when he's in the war and he's doing the surgery where he contracts syphilis. But the rest of the time, we're sort of spending it watching people relate to one another, think about those relationships, and act upon those relationships. And I think it's a nice. I appreciate the interiority of what this film is doing.
Yeah, I mean, thank you though for like mentioning Drunken Angel.
You're welcome. I live to serve.
Because you're welcome, America. Because
we're doing a podcast about Akira Kurosawa. You're welcome, America.
Because like that.
USA. USA.
That's a great.
USA.
That's a great comparison because again, you don't get like a lot of different. It's still, like that film is still very intimate. It's not like expansive or epic in any sort of way. It feels like it just takes place on like these, like 3 city blocks,
right?
And it's basically that's where the entirety of the story is told. And I'm like, oh,
well, but there's sets and there's like scenes in dance halls and there's scenes like in markets, and that this film has none of that. This film is like 5 rooms.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I feel like at least. It's a welcome change from feeling like we have to watch something that's super expansive. Also, I want to say something that I feel like I'm being like, movies used to be better. But I tried to watch Dr. Sleep.
Oh, yeah.
So HBO Max has the director's cut, which is 3 hours long.
Whoa.
So I was like, I'm going to try to watch this.
Who directed that?
It seems like Mike Flanagan.
Uh-huh.
And like totally effective opening, like powerful movie. But I was watching it last night, and there's the early scenes in the movie reference the original Shining film and story. And there's a scene where Danny meets up with the old man from the hotel whose name escapes me. And I felt like very burdened by watching it because I haven't seen the Shining movie in at least 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. And like, it was so nice to watch something that was just like an original story, 90 minutes, boom, bang. Like that was really, really great. And I think one of the most like regenerative things about this process is like, we're not watching franchise movies. We might be watching movies that spawned franchises, but we're not watching franchises. I want to come back to the ending of the movie, but let's get there. Let's talk about the farting.
There's a lot of it.
The farting. So what do I mean when I say so there's a little kid in the movie who has had an appendicitis.
That's yes.
He can't.
Sorry, when you put this in the script, I thought you were joking, but now that you mention it again, yes, I remember.
Yeah, there's a little boy, and like he the instruction is he can't eat anything until he farts.
Right.
And there is a scene in the movie where, and I want to talk about this scene specifically because I wonder what it might mean, where Toshiro Mifune as Kyoji Fujisaka is sort of having a conversation with Misao Matsumoto, his fiance, and I think this is the scene where he's kind of like, "Don't come back." Like she keeps showing up at the clinic and being like, "Oh, I want to," making him dinner and trying to like endear herself to him because she knows that something has gone wrong. And during this very emotional scene, we like hear laughter, and then it cuts to the patient's quarters, and the boy has farted, and there's all these close-ups of people in the ward laughing.
Well, he's also playing the harmonica.
He's playing the harmonica, so there's like this celebration among the people that are the patients there. And earlier in the film, there's reference made to the fact that like the father of this young boy can't afford to pay for his treatment, and Mifune's like, "Don't worry about it, whatever." So this moment kind of has this upstairs downstairs vibe to it. I don't know how to describe it, but I felt like it was worth bringing up in the context of like, why is this in the movie?
Well, do you remember Mifune also says like, "Yeah, don't worry about paying. It's not like you live in the United States of America." Ha ha ha! And they have a laugh, and they're like, "Yes, because if you have a tummy ache in the United States, you'll die."
It's going to cost you $45,000.
And if you can't pay for your tummy ache, you're just going to fucking die.
Oh, you have a tummy ache? Sorry.
You're dead, motherfucker.
Oh, your tummy hurts? Your tummy hurts?
This country is a nightmare. I just that to me was like almost a how to put it, like a carnivalesque or a kind of ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous might be too strong of a word, but a kind of a grotesque, like a grotesque inversion or a grotesque kind of take on what Mifune's character is going through. In the sense, like
interesting.
In the sense, like they all
he
have
has to
like,
purge something from his system.
Yeah, or that they all have like these bodily ailments, and that it's like a really, really small place for the film to have some like levity,
which it needs. It's not a light film.
It's not, but also that there's just this sense of like it's another bodily illness. I mean, I think what this film does really, really well, at least what it did for me, affectively, emotionally, is that it made me at times like feel like the
feelings.
It made me feel feelings.
I felt stuff.
I was like, wow, there's these people in this flat screen and they're moving. It's almost like they're alive
and
they're
their
real.
Feelings and their movement
give me
are
feelings
a kind of
movements.
Flickering of light.
Yeah.
That gives me access to a world of forms.
Yeah, it's
and
crazy.
Ideas.
It's crazy.
Wow.
No,
I love Plato.
It made me feel like the burden. You know, Susan Sontag has an essay in which she compares movie watching to the allegory of the cave.
Interesting. That makes total sense. Of course. Yeah.
Duh.
Duh, Susan Sontag.
Duh. Of course.
Duh. That has to be the tagline for this episode. Duh, Susan
Sontag. Of course.
But I think you're right. I think there is a kind of like parallelism between the boys, like kind of like childish suffering of like having a bad tummy and like kind of the adult. There's a lot of angst in this movie.
Well, and a lot of like, I guess what I was trying to say is like, before you rudely interrupted me.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
So anyway, I was thinking
I interrupted
maybe
myself.
Yeah, you fucker.
that the embodiment of like the sickness or the disease is really felt and present.
Do you feel like, I think related to that, one thing I think that is interesting about that, and to come back to the upstairs downstairs idea, the idea that the doctor is feeling what the patients feel, is that this movie does not create much of a division between like the healers and the sick.
Yes. Yeah.
And nor does Drunken Angel.
Yeah. Well, but and this is what makes this movie so typically religious, in the sense that like the saint is the one that suffers the most, right? Or the saint, let's say, who is the one that cures, is also afflicted with the disease which he can cure. Ah,
I see. Okay, so is then do we think of like Kyoji Fujisaka as like Fujisaki as a martyr? Is he a martyr figure?
Of course. Okay. Yeah, just like in Drunken Angel with the doctor in that one, he's afflicted by like his alcoholism, but also on the other hand, he's a person who saves lives.
And one thing that's interesting in the dichotomy, you know who did not like this movie very much is our buddy Stuart Galbraith.
Yes.
His review of the film is that it's stagey and it's artificial, and it doesn't quite go anywhere. And he sort of says that one of the things, and I think this is a good place to talk about this, one of the issues they had with Drunken Angel is they didn't know what Takashi Shimura's character was going to be like until they met an alcoholic doctor. And before that, he was kind of just a noble doctor type. And I think one of the great things about Drunken Angel is how cynical and angry and drunk Shimura is, but he still has faith in humanity. Galbraith's sort of opinion of this movie is that Mifune is too much of that like noble good doctor type, which brings me to like a big question I have in this movie, and I put it down here, is why doesn't Fujisaki just tell Misao that he cut himself and he has syphilis? All of the problems of the movie are solved by that decision.
But I think the point of that isn't like, doesn't that like again bring us back to like this question of masculinity? Like it's about like honor and dignity. So that the idea is like he has like a sick or a bad disease. Because he even says it too, where it's only associated. He says, like, I have this illness, this sickness, and I didn't even get it in a pleasurable way, he says. Obviously, fucking. It's something. Which is
what he wanted to do, but he was trying to be noble.
Yeah, exactly. So I just read it as, like, well, think about it. I mean, it's just like this very.
Think about it.
Think about it. It's just like
about it.
You know, like, he's like a traditional, and that, like, dooms him, right? It's this traditional masculinity. And he's bound to, let's say, just not being able to admit that he has this illness.
And I think that that's interesting to think about. So at the end of the film, Misao gets married and sends him a postcard. And Mifune, or I should say Kyoji Fujisaki, is like shown at work with his father, who he works in the clinic with. Mm-hmm. And they are operating on someone, and there's in the final shots of this movie, there's this feeling of like he's doing his job, he's good at it, he's like given himself over to his profession as his main focus, and I felt I think that the film views him as honorable and views him as good, and I like, you know, talking about masculinity, I feel like this is actually a kind of a piss poor representation of masculinity, because it's like this guy can't admit to his faults. And I think, or not to his faults, I should say, he's so caught up in himself and what he's supposed to represent that he can't just like, he didn't do anything wrong.
I disagree. I think you're potentially not thinking about it contextually, in all honesty.
Tell me more.
Well, I mean, just think about, let's say, I don't know. I'm just like thinking about, it's a very different, obviously, kind of dynamic, but I'm even just thinking about, let's say, like closeted men in the like 80s or something, or even fucking today, right? Who feel like they have to find themselves in relationships and, let's say, perform certain kinds of like traditional heteronormative kinds of like masculinity, and then maybe at some point are like, well, I can't do this but like are never able to like admit to their partners or their wives who they really are. I mean that shit happens all the time. I'm not saying it's cool, but I'm saying like there are societal strictures and pressures that force people to make decisions they would rather not make.
That's a good point. And I also think we're you know, to put a blank, or to put a sort of a blank statement on it, the idea of honor and nobility is very, very important to Japanese culture. It was obviously very, very important at this time. So there's a certain amount of like need to save face that. But I'm also, I just like thinking about, let's say, contemporary media that looks back on, let's say, early and mid 20th century masculinities, things like Brokeback Mountain, for example, and the ways in which like clearly what the film is saying is that there were so many people that, for a variety of reasons and in a variety of different kind of ways, not just like obviously due to sexuality, but for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Like just find themselves, let's say, not being able to admit who they are, and especially to the people like closest to them. I suppose that what I totally see that, and I think that's true, and I think that's like a really strong, and that speaks to the idea of interiority, which we talked about before, is like the inability to like take that which is within you and sort of externalize it. But I guess my issue is, and again, I'm viewing it through like a contemporary lens, is that, and this is an interesting question, because to me it feels a little dramatically inert.
Mm-hmm.
Like
That's
it
fair,
doesn't build upon itself, which is like, then what is the responsibility of like a film to be sort of like working in the time that it takes place and like working with those cultural mores versus like what should it be doing dramatically to keep it engaging. And I should say I still found this movie engaging. I just maybe my response to it was that I was frustrated with the fact that he didn't say, he couldn't admit it. And maybe that's part of the point, right? Is he can't talk about it. There's two moments I want to highlight real quick as we talk about this. And then I want to talk about the end. But do you remember the moment towards the end of the film where... Two things. The first is the scene where Takashi Shimura and Mifune try to light each other's cigarettes.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's just a beautiful moment of like a father and son thing and kind of like an interesting thing. I want to bring that up. But then the most powerful moment in the movie to me is when Misao is about to leave and she says, we're getting married at 2:00. We leave for the honeymoon at 5.
Yeah.
And his response is, the train will be crowded.
Yeah.
And she said, yes, I've heard that. And I found that so powerful because it's like, that's a 2-shot. It's held on them for a while. What else do you say?
What else do you say? Yeah. No, yeah. It's heartbreaking.
It's like the joke about like, if you're on an elevator with someone and you're making eye contact, you can't be like, I don't talk to my parents. Like you have to say something like, sunny out.
Right, yeah. Or yeah, like the like back in the days when we used to go to restaurants and the waiter or waitress would come over and like, hey, how you doing tonight? Be like, well, actually, I'm going through a really kind of terrible
so
existential
earlier
crisis
today
right
I
now.
broke up with someone and my dog has syphilis and he won't admit it to anyone. And
my dog,
which is awkward because
Sparky,
I brought
Sparky,
him to
do you
the
have
doctor.
syphilis? Sparky, do you have syphilis? Rawr. Sparky, you could tell me. I love you, Sparky. I love you. Regardless of what you're doing at night, I love you. Like no,
You're
it's not
still my dog, Sparky.
It's not what you think. I accidentally got it from a other dog's bowl. Sure you did, Sparky. Sure
he was doing surgery in World War II.
Yes, but that also like that connects back to the other moments where again, like the woman's like, you know, I kind of don't have any issues with your illness, and I might have fallen in love with you. And
so let's talk about that. Yes.
And then he's like, there's a sick patient in room so-and-so. Can you give me his chart?
So my favorite thing about the movie is Noriko Sengoku as the nurse, Ryu Minagishi. Mm-hmm. So Noriko Sengoku, you might remember from Drunken Angel. As the barmaid.
Right. Yes.
She's the barmaid who also has feelings for Mifune's Yakuza character a little bit. Like she likes him.
Right.
And Noriko Sengoku's in a lot of movies. She's going to come up in more Kurosawa movies. She was kind of a stable member of the family. So I don't know if you looked this up, but in the subtitles, she's referred to as a dancer.
I did not. No.
She's not a dancer. She was a prostitute.
Oh.
The American subtitle translates dancer as prostitute. So the implication is that this character is previously a prostitute and she's been given a job and she's pregnant with a baby.
Yeah.
And she's been given a job by Mifune's character and he works for her. And she kind of is like a fish out of water in the environment. Like there's the idea that she's not quite like the movie portrays her as like not quite your typical nurse. She's kind of like gossipy and chatty and like kind of outwardly, I would say kind of realist or cynical about the world.
She's just like, she's very cynical. Yeah.
But she's in love with him, and the implication is that over the course of the film, she kind of transforms from this kind of like, meh, I don't really care about this kind of thing, to being like a very dutiful nurse, which is the biggest transformation in the movie. I don't think Mifune's character kind of starts as one thing and stays that thing the whole time.
Totally,
the movie kind of ennobles him. But how did you feel about this transformation of the character?
Yeah, I mean, I in all honesty, I wasn't necessarily even thinking about a transformation. I was just thinking about it like, wow, she is one of the most captivating parts of the film. And again,
she's incredible.
How heartbreaking. I was just like struck by how heartbreaking that scene is, because she does have like a lot of moments earlier in the film, and none of the earlier moments really captivated me, although I was like, oh, she's kind of like the cynical, pessimistic nurse who's kind of like seen it all. She's jaded. But yeah, that scene, man.
Jaded. Sorry. Wow.
It's all good.
Remember that Aerosmith song?
God, I mean, now I do, unfortunately.
Yeah. No one's thought about it since 2005.
But Yeah, I was like, that scene just like totally broke my heart. It was a beautiful scene.
The climax.
The climax, yeah.
Man, that scene didn't do anything for me.
But even that moment, even that exchange, because it is almost like two scenes.
Okay, yes. Yeah, the end. So I really love this movie. I thought the camera directing or the use of the cinematography in that scene's incredible because it's like a 5-minute take that just follows him around. And like Kurosawa is a great example of in-camera editing where he like knows where to put the camera so you get your close-up, your wide, da-da-da-da-da. It moves around a lot. But, you know, as we said at the beginning of the episode, I found the decision to have Mifune play like a non-gangster character, like a little more like interior, a little more straight-laced, so to speak, really compelling. His performance in this movie is so quiet.
Yeah.
For most of it, like he's like whispery. He uses that kind of like natural kind of that he has in his voice in like a very different way. He like exudes authority, but he doesn't have to try. But I found this like explosion when characters explode emotionally in movies. I find it hard to sustain that for more than like a minute, and this goes on and on and on, and at a certain point, I was like. I get it.
I think what I really liked
upset.
about it is that it kind of crystallized, in all honesty, like what was at stake, where like all this kind of like innuendo and doublespeak kind of just came out, and he was just like really like, he's like, listen, he's like, I have not touched, you know, this woman who I'm in love with in months or years, and like I would have to wait potentially another 5 or 10 years to do as such. Like so for me, one of the things that it captured me about it was it's honesty and its directness, and part of me was also like, holy shit, like I was like shocked at how directly open this film was about like this guy being like, yep, haven't fucked, really want to fuck, but I got syphilis, so I can't fuck. And it was like, damn.
It's weird that he says that. The only lines in English are, want to fuck, can't
weird.
fuck.
That was audio. That was direct audio right there that you heard directly from.
Yeah, that was really good.
Liam edited it in. Yeah.
I did.
So I was just kind of taken back by that too. I was like, whoa. I was like, this film is very directly dealing with what's at stake. So I think for me, it was kind of like a very kind of, I guess, traditional like cathartic moment.
Well, first of all, catharsis is suspect. But second of all,
as Aristotle would say,
I would
that
agree with
sus.
You. It's weird that he said that.
Yeah.
He was like, can't fuck, wanna fuck. And then he was like, catharsis is... Listen, catharsis, you suspect.
I wonder what Aristotle... I mean, it's lost in history, but I do wonder what Aristotle's lost treatise on cam girls would have said.
Let me pull it up real quick.
You have it? I thought it was lost.
Let me pull it up real quick.
You can't see it, folks, but Liam is gesturing towards me in a very disgusting...
No, this is the middle finger. Don't make it be the other thing. I agree with you in that I think the writing in that scene's really good. The camera stuff is really good. Noriko Sengoku's really good in it. Except for the
the cries,
the wailing doesn't do it for me at all.
Me too.
But I just don't think Mifune is like there
in that scene.
I don't think he's that. At least the really amazing actor. Maybe like this was a stretch at this point for him. He'd been in like 2 other movies. Like he wasn't, you know. It's a tough acting moment, and I just wish it had been a little more contained. That being said, like I recognize the need for that cathartic kind of thing. And you're right. Like, I think the writing is really, really good because he's repressed. He's a repressed character. And this is the moment where he's allowed to not be repressed. And then he sort of reveals himself to this woman and she's like, I love you. And he's like, well, gotta work. Got work to do.
Do you know
what do you think? Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, sorry.
It's fine.
It reminded me also, now that we were talking about it, it reminded me of like, I mean, Kafka to an extent, but also Kierkegaard, who famously like broke up with his fiance because he wanted to be like a bohemian and not like a typical bourgeois like married dude.
Right.
But there's an essay.
How'd that work out?
But there's an essay. Well, he turned out to be one of the greatest philosophers of all time. But there's an essay.
That's true. Yeah, but was he happy, George?
How glib of you. No, he's miserable. I mean, aren't we all?
I'm good. I feel great.
I feel great. Never been better.
I'm going to go to the library today, pick up some books.
I mean, I do miss books.
Nice.
At least books from the library.
You're surrounded. I'm like looking at your apartment and I see like a refrigerator and books.
I meant books from the goddamn library.
Libraries are the best. Shout out to libraries.
They're amazing. Yeah, our friend
Cal is a
an
librarian.
amazing librarian. Shout out to them. I was thinking.
Shout out to the Cal in all our lives.
Kierkegaard, who famously broke up. Kierkegaard, who famously broke up with his fiance, and then there was an essay that was written by, I believe it was Maurice Blanchot, who like made the argument that maybe Kierkegaard, I think this isn't an essay in Blanchot, but basically that Kierkegaard might have been suffering from like some sort of like disease, right? So like he might have had like syphilis, and it prevented him from like marrying his like the love of his life.
And like was he did he have the syphilitic
No, I don't think so. I mean the art, I think the part of the essay just basically that he has like a certain like deep dark secret that he can't share, and I don't think Blanchot ever specifically says that it is an STD, but it just reminded me of like, oh, this interesting thing about like this person who bears this secret, this incredible painful secret, whatever it might be, and they can't share with this other person, and it prevents them from being with them. So it just kind of, I was like, oh,
that is really interesting. I was reading, well, never mind. That's a digression. Let's talk about the themes and ideas in this movie. I definitely think I was looking back at our notes for our episode on Drunken Angel, and I think that there are some sort of thematic parallels to this movie. So just to really quickly look at what we said about Drunken Angel. What? No, don't do that. Don't do that. This is what happens when you forget to open the notes in the document. Some notes from, so real quick, Sanshiro Sugata, we had spiritual enlightenment as an element of that, growth and change, time passing in this. I love the constant cut to the fence with the thorns on it. That's really, really beautiful. So we see that here. Couple things we should talk about. A world where people are looking for meaning.
Ooh, deep.
Tensions between older and younger generations. Do we see that in this movie? I think we clearly see the looking for meaning in this movie. I think that's kind of obvious. But the tensions between older generations and younger ones.
So I read this really interesting New York Times review. I forgot when it was published, but
1979.
Is it the one that begins with this talking about this in relationship to Rashomon?
Probably, because this movie didn't get released here until 1979.
So that there's the argument made there, and I forget who the film critic is, but that this film has been read as an allegory for kind of Japan's involvement in the war. So like it's not a coincidence that he contracts this illness while he's a war doctor.
Interesting. I didn't see that review.
Yeah, and that it's basically just kind of supposed to be like an allegory for like the sickness of nationalism. So
wow.
And I didn't think about that until I read this review. I was like, oh, that's a very interesting and provocative kind of take. And shame, yeah, of course. Right,
because,
yes. Not being able to admit.
Like many countries in the first half of the 20th century, not all of Japan's history is flattering, so to speak.
Yeah, what other country might be referring to?
It's complicated.
Yeah.
But just USA. USA.
Well, I was about to say, yeah, like just pretty much like every nation's.
Every nation also.
All pretty much.
But that is interesting.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, that's a really kind of, powerful, perhaps allegorical take on it.
In your notes for Drunken Angel, you made a comment about who's the drunken angel of the film. In this film, what does the Quiet Duel refer to?
Ooh, it's funny because I definitely was thinking about that too. I was like, wait, this movie's called Quiet Duel, or at least in English translation, it's called Quiet Duel.
So we might be talking about the fallibility of like a translation, but I don't know. I genuinely
or the fallibility of man. Am I right?
Oh
no, I mean I think it's supposed to. It's just supposed to refer to like his inner strife.
But the duel implies two people.
Right. So like let's say the person who hold this the sick person
literally as go ahead.
The sick person that he is, and the doctor that he is. Isn't it ironic, Liam, that the doctor cannot cure himself? It's like rain on your wedding day.
Oh my God. Alanis, get at me. I don't know if this is a theme, but I think it's something to mention, which is there's a parallel in the relationship between Mifune and Shimura in Drunken Angel, as there is between Mifune's character Fujisaki and the Nakata, the man who gives him the syphilis, and that Fujisaki goes to him and is like, you need to treat your syphilis. And the guy's like, I don't have it. I'm fine. Which is an interesting thing to think about as a parallel to Japan's involvement in World War II and nationalism, because this guy like rejects it. He's like, no, it's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. But the film definitely, there's a callback. It's actually kind of crazy how much similarity there are between those two things.
We'll see. Yeah. So this is kind of like an early iteration of the MCU. It's slowly building up to something.
The Akira Kurosawa cinematic universe.
Well, it's all but it's all about doctors.
You know, and I think that we're gonna get there. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but one of the most interesting things about the movie Seven Samurai is how the relationship between the peasants and the samurai and the tensions therein. And I think that these movies kind of explore, to be really blank about it, the relationship between those who can help and those who are helpless to some extent. And the idea of like, in all these films so far, there are people being like, I know what is good for you and you need to do this. And the rejection of that idea a little bit, and the consequences of that to some extent, you know. There is a certain amount of like this movie being about personal responsibility, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. It's just funny also thinking, I'm glad you mentioned the samurai films, because we're watching this, I was thinking, again, like these kind of themes of like spirituality and how you see them like in Senshiro Sugata. You see it in Drunken Angel, obviously it's here. And then I'm thinking like, well,
a lot of flowers. Yeah,
I was like, are those issues also like, do they manifest themselves in like the samurai films? Like, but it's been a while since I've seen them, so I'm really looking forward to seeing them again and thinking perhaps about them as like what are they doing thematically different from these earlier films?
Well, and also how are some of the same thematic ideas going to come up in much larger films? Because obviously I would say these last two films, well, keeping in mind, it's hard to keep this in mind, but we skipped a great number of this is Kurosawa's 9th film.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's definitely like figured out what he's doing as a director, and he's about to like steer into this relationship with an actor who's going to be successful enough to let him command like big studio budgets and make big movies. So it's like, how is this stuff going to play out on like a much larger canvas? You know, Stray Dog at times has a document, like they filmed it on location in Tokyo, as Stuart pointed out when we spoke with him, and like the last two films have felt like movies made on sound stages, and we're about to like move away from that, at least with the next film, and in style and stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see how these themes play out when like you're working on a larger canvas or like in a more like a real setting as opposed to a soundstage.
Yeah, totally.
I really dug this movie. I sort of think you brought up a good point about like the great question, at least to me, of like, why doesn't he just admit what's going on, and how that's much more complicated than the dramatics of it would allow.
Yeah, and I think also it becomes a little bit more easier to swallow as a kind of dramatic focal point if you also think about it in an allegorical kind of way. Are you smiling because I said swallow? Liam, grow up.
I'm Liam Billingham.
Grow up. I'm George.
Oh, no, we're not yet. Next up on the show, Stray Dog.
Yes.
Which I can't wait to watch. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you write a review, we read it on the show. Sometimes it comes much later because of how we record this show. We just recorded like 5 episodes in the past week.
But we read it.
But we read it on the show, and you get a little burst of like, if your review's nice. Only if it's good. We don't read the bad ones, if I'm honest. But please rate, review, subscribe to the show, say nice things. Yeah, I guess is there anything else?
No, I would say watch this film though. It's a good one.
Yeah, watch this film. Watch Stray Dog. That's up next. And I'm Liam Billingham.
Whoa, I'm George Fragopoulos.
And this was Oeuvre Busters.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. All right, Sparky, stop drinking that water. Sparky.
We figured out that it has syphilis.